instead of learning the tricks of the trade, try learning the trade. What inspired me to pursue a career in law? My mother. I'd love to give you some story about justice or some fight I wanted to fight, but the truth is, my mother always gave me good advice, and that might have been the best advice she ever gave me. I grew up in a family of coal miners. My father was a coal miner, and especially the men that are close to me, my uncles and cousins, are also coal miners, and they're also really handy. Most coal miners are. And because of that, I think I have a natural curiosity when I encounter mechanical things. We do a lot of things on behalf of our clients here at Bailey Javins Carter, a lot of coal mining cases, but some of those cases involve machinery and an understanding of machinery, machines, and those things has helped me in my practice. And I think it sets me apart a little bit, but just a natural curiosity that comes from being around machines all my life. They don't necessarily intimidate me, and quite to the contrary, I find them fascinating. I want to learn more. And I think that's helpful when you do what we do in this line of work. When I was a kid, I had dreams of becoming a football player. And I did. I went to WVU. I played on some really good football teams. I was on the same team as Major Harris, and so we had some great teams. But the one thing that I took away from that was I learned that hard work does pay off. And so there came a point when I was in college, and it was clear that I've done all I can do in football. And that is, I was a good, solid backup. But I said, let's take this energy and let's redirect it. And I tell people this all the time. My coach was Don Nealon at WVU. Everything I learned from Don Nealon applies to the practice of law. And if you hear me or see me practicing law, there's more Don Nealon than there is any professor I had in law school. And so I just took that energy and applied it to law, and it served me very well. 6 or 7 years ago, I went down to South Carolina to visit my sister who was working down there, and I went to her office and I met her assistant, a lovely lady, and we had the best time. We were talking, and I just remembered her. And then maybe, I don't know, 6 months, a year later, my sister said, do you remember her? I was like, how could I forget her? She was so charming. She goes, well, oddly enough, she's had this lump in her neck, and her doctor has been telling her for 3 years now that it's nothing, and he's been prescribing antibiotics. And now 3 years later, we find out it's cancer. And I said to her, because I don't do bed mal, I said, sis, and it would be a South Carolina case. I don't practice in South Carolina either, but we do team up with a firm in South Carolina a fair amount. And I said, send me the records. So those records came in on my desk, and they sat there for a week. And I saw those records, and I thought, before I forward these on, if the lawyer calls back with a question, I don't want to sound like an idiot. So I just picked a record up, and I couldn't put them down. It was the most compelling story I've ever read. And it was how this lady went to her doctor, and they just kept kind of dismissing her complaints. A month or so later, my wife and daughter and I went to Spain. As I'm taking the shower, I noticed, that's odd, I have a lump in my neck. But then I had my well visit 2 weeks later, and the doctor said, man, you look great. Anything concerning you? I said, well, there is this. And he put his hand on it. It was still small, but he goes, and he looked at me and he said, and he's become a bit of a friend. He said, the standard of care says that we look at this again in a year. I just kind of cocked my head like, what I do for a living, right? And he goes, yeah. And that would have been in August of, I believe, 18, maybe 19. Anyway, by November, I was diagnosed with cancer, and it metastasized from the base of my tongue to my lymph nodes, and that's what the lump was. But the source of it was my tongue, and we cut the lymph nodes out, and then I went through a series of radiation and chemotherapy for a number of weeks, and I went through the whole gamut, and that client saved my life. And her story wasn't so lucky. Her family had, took some comfort in the doctor finally saying I messed up, and we won the lawsuit, whatever that means. That's the most profound client I've ever had. Wow. If I hadn't been a lawyer, I really wanted to be an architect. When I was a kid, I loved Lego blocks. They weren't as fancy as they are now. They were just blocks. And I loved to build buildings and stadiums, and I had an erector set. And I had a teacher tell me at about 5th grade that, because what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be an architect. She's like, well, you have to be good at math, and you're not good at math. And she talked me right out of that, and here I am. I try to tell my lawyers, or anyone, the best way to become a good writer is to read. The ability to think critically is important, but more importantly is the ability to communicate critical thoughts with the written word is far more important than people realize. You know, when you watch the TV law dramas, you see people arguing in court. But what most people don't realize is before you find yourself in a courtroom, you spent years drafting pleadings and communicating with the court and trying to communicate your arguments and the status of the law through the written word. And I think if you read for entertainment, first of all, you expand your base of knowledge, you expand your vocabulary, and you learn to write. So my advice would be read. The thing that would surprise people about the practice of law, at least trial law, and everyone thinks, and I've had so many people say, my kid is good at arguing, they should be a lawyer. And no, you need to be a good critical thinker, and you need to be able to phrase a complex thought simply. If you're arguing, you're losing, all right? The job is not to argue. Hi, my name is Lee Javins. I'm a lawyer at Bailey Javins Carter. If you've been hurt because of someone's negligence or because of a defective product, call us.